right. Let's see. We have a couple more joining us. Okay.
Now, if anybody hasn't voted yet, I want you to get up and go and vote and come back and we'll still be here, okay?
Yeah, we have to vote. Absolutely have to vote.
Unless you live in Delaware, because there's nothing being voted on in this off year.
Well, I used to explain to my students that my grandmother, who fled the South, as she would put it, in 1925, always took me with her to vote when I was little. So I watched it happen, and it became a very important process.
My father would take me and my brother to vote when he voted, yeah. When you live in a city like Philadelphia, every once in a while you get to vote in somebody's basement. So you get to see what their laundry room looks like, you know? I remember that. And their beer refrigerator, you made sure they had enough beer in there. And so
wow.
It's always and today I voted at the recreation center around the corner. You know, so.
Well, we have a nephew in Philadelphia. I'm gonna have to find out about that. I've never voted in someone's house. I voted in schools and churches, community centers.
Yeah.
But wow.
Yeah, somebody's basement. Stood right by their washing machine, waiting to vote.
I remember going with my parents to vote in the 50s at my elementary school. And my mother was from Texas, and she had very strong opinions about things. And she would, like in 1956, if someone took too long in the voting booth, she'd say, ticket splitters. like it was the worst thing you could think of. Why wouldn't you just vote straight Democratic?
Well, in Texas, that was against the law, wasn't it?
Well, in the 50s in Texas, it was probably.
You know who Adlai Stevenson was back then.
I've been to a synagogue for the first time to vote.
Huh. Voted in church halls.
What was that like?
Recreation centers, gymnasiums, basements, just about anywhere you want to guess. As long as it had a roof over it, you could vote there.
As long as we could exercise the franchise. Okay, I'm still admitting people, so let's get started.
Okay.
Welcome to the monthly meeting of the New York chapter of Mystery Writers of America. Before we get on with our CrimeCraft discussion, I will turn it over to chapter president Al Tucker, so we can, if he has things that he would wish to share or report.
Al? Thanks, Gary. Yeah, just a couple of things. We have two things coming up in December. Tuesday, December 5th is our holiday party, back by popular demand at Bowery Road, just south of Union Square on 4th Avenue. Their party facility is called the Library of Distilled Spirits, so you might also see it referred to it that way. We're sending out a mass email with the Eventbrite link to sign up. The cost is $25. We're trying to make this as affordable as possible for everyone. So I hope to see everyone there. The other thing is on Wednesday, the 21st, I believe. Let's see, 5, 12, 19. Wednesday the 20th, that must be, is another KGB reading. Atypically, it's a Wednesday. We almost always have them on Tuesday. and that will be the last one of this year. It may be the last one ever at KGB Bar since they raised our drink minimum. But we need a good audience, and I'm sure we will have a good program. And that's basically what I have. So back to you, Gary.
Okay. Well, welcome to CrimeCraft, where we have freewheeling discussions about the type of people we are. And you know the type of people we are. We had dinner this weekend with several friends, one of whom had a birthday, but one of our friends won a wheelbarrow full of liquor at a charity event last spring, I think it was. And she had to leave. And my Tammy is one of her closest friends. She said, "Would you hang on to my ticket?" And then we got to text her saying, "You won your wheelbarrow full of liquor." So we were having dinner the other night, and people were talking about things to do with the wheelbarrow. And of course, I'm thinking, oh, you can move a body with that. Because that's the kind of person I am, writing the sort of thing that I write. And other people know it because somebody at one point said, "I bet Gary would have something else to do with that wheelbarrow." So we do think of bizarre things, and Tammy laughs when she says it now. She says everybody she knows that if she disappears, they have to talk to me. But we spend a lot of time thinking about the craft of crime writing, how we make a story compelling, how we develop characters. And there are so many different aspects of a good story, right? You know, plot, your writing style, complexity of your setting, and so forth. And we've talked about a number of those things over the last year and a half, or however long I've been playing around with this crime writing thing. But we haven't talked exclusively about sleuths. And that's tonight's topic. Because when we set up these puzzles, and I used to tell my students that a mystery is a pas de deux. It's a dance between a writer and a reader, or a dance between the writer and the audience in a play, or the audience in a movie theater. And so we set up these stories that have puzzles which range from simple to complex. And we need somebody who sorts it all out and makes it work for our puzzle partner, the person we're dancing with, who's being led, and for every step thinking, does this step point me to one thing or another? So I want to open up the discussion to sleuths. I want to talk about a variety of things with sleuths, because we all know the most famous sleuths, the Sherlock Holmes, the Hercule Poirots. For every type of mystery we have a sleuth that falls into that category. The old woman who solves crimes range from Miss Marple to Murder, She Wrote. We have the hard-boiled detective, the guy who's a two-fisted, well, I don't want to use the term mug. That's not admitted. That's not used often anymore. But he's a tough guy and is not afraid to get his fists dirty if he needs to. We have the person who is devoted to complex thought, or as Poe put it when he created C. Auguste Dupin, ratiocination. A person who is a rational thinker who puts everything together. The best examples of that are, of course, Holmes and Poirot. We have detectives or sleuths from all walks of life. Some of them are gifted and they know exactly what to do, and others less so, but they stumble into one thing after another until they solve the mystery that they're having to address. So I'm going to ask a group of people who create sleuths, talk about some of their favorite sleuths and their creations as well. What is it that you try to give a sleuth? And toward the end, I'm going to toss out the delightful question, because admit it, you've written a book or a story, you've seen it on the screen, either the small screen or the big screen or on stage. You've seen it, and you've had some ideas about who you might like to play your protagonist. I think that's always a lot of fun. So let's open it up. And as Poirot would say, it's depending on the little gray cells. Who'd like to go first? You can use the hand raising icon where you are moving your mouse, or you can just stick your hand up. Linda, is that? Linda?
I think Vicky has a hand up.
Oh,
Okay.
hi, Gary, that might be, I just joined,
Oh, okay.
but
I saw
I'm
your
sorry, I
hand.
missed the question.
Oh, I said put your hand up, and at that moment,
Oh,
your hand
that's just,
past the screen. Okay, Vicky?
Well, one of the sleuths that I've enjoyed the most reading about in the last few years were the first few books by Joe Ide of Isaiah Quintanabe, an East Los Angeles young man who's very brilliant. And his sobriquet is IQ. It's his initials, but he also was extremely bright, and it was just such fun watching him work. I thought those were incredibly entertaining.
Okay. What makes a sleuth? It's fun watching them work, but what does that? And I toss that out, and I'll use two examples that of characteristics that we appreciate. In the very first Star Trek film, I remember seeing it in the theater. Big Star Trek fan. I watched the first broadcast, and I've been a lifelong fan. And we were sitting in a crowded theater because people had been waiting for a Star Trek movie. And DeForest Kelley appeared on screen as Dr. McCoy. Throughout the theater, you heard people saying, Jim, Jim, in a Dr. McCoy impression. And there was a certain comfort in that because we knew who Dr. McCoy was. Likewise, in the James Bond film, The Living Daylights, Bond's at a carnival, and he's taking shots at a shooting gallery. And the guy who's running the shooting gallery, he starts to reload. The guy says, and just hands him the biggest stuffed animal he has. That was a funny moment because we understood the character. What do you understand about your character, Vicky, about IQ that makes him such a pleasure to watch work?
Well, first of all, he can see through a lot of things going on in his community, and it's an interesting community because it's multicultural and multiracial and so forth, and so it's a little different. He's got some friends who are great foils of his. His best friend is a hilarious character, but IQ is Isaiah is not he's not trying to dominate every scene. He's just sort of like going along behind the scenes, figuring everything out, and eventually when you get to the end, oh yeah, he's got it. So his personality, that is as the way it is described, and the people that surround him, I think Joe Ide did a really good job of sort of making a 360-degree world for him to live in.
Okay. All right. I think that's extremely important. We have to have people who are recognizable as people.
Well, the Watson to Holmes and the the fellow who had been in the war to the little gray cells.
Poirot, the
Poirot,
Captain
yeah.
Hastings. Yes,
Captain Higgins, right? Or
Hastings.
Hastings. Yeah, they all have to have somebody that they can play off of.
I used to tell my students when we would read a Sherlock Holmes story, and yeah, 45 years teaching English. I'm full of stories about how they react to things. But I used to tell them, you know who Dr. Watson is? And they would say, who? We are. Watson's purpose is to observe Holmes for us so we can see through Watson's eyes and be amazed as he is by what Holmes comes up with. And I agree, we do have to have people who match our sleuth in the sense of they complete sleuth because the sleuth has a certain level of detachment, perhaps.
Although, you know, thinking about it, that's probably more of an issue in third person, because in first person, you get access to everything the sleuth knows,
Sure.
so you're aware of it. But with Holmes, he's opaque, and so we only know what he tells somebody, and it would be strange if he was talking to strangers on the street. So he has Watson to kind of, you know, tell, and then Watson can wonder about stuff just like we do.
That's a good point, because I don't think Holmes could be a good first person character, because first he'd probably wind up insulting his reader far too much for the reader's comfort. But there is a mystery to him in addition to the mystery he solves, and that may be part of the attraction, because a good first person narrator has the luxury of being wrong, has the luxury of making mistakes and getting the wrong perception. And I think that's important too. That
If Holmes were first person, he'd be talking down to us, the reader.
Yes.
But as it is, he gets to talk down to Watson, which doesn't offend us, but we get to sit in and find, you know, learn from what he's telling Watson.
Yes.
And all those times that as you're reading a Holmes story and Holmes is in disguise, for example, and Watson doesn't realize it, but you, the reader, do, it makes you feel that much more clever as a reader.
Yes. The actor, the great actor Paxton Whitehead, passed away recently. I had the pleasure of seeing him on stage once in Sherlock Holmes play called, I think it was Crucible of Blood. And there's a scene where he is in disguise. And they did the program in such a way that there was a character, Melvin, played by Melvin Lumb. And, you know, who else? Who's Melvin Lumb? He was just listed as in the actors, even had a bio for him. So we're watching, and then at one point, Watson is talking to this character played by Melvin Lumb, and then Whitehead changes his accent back to Sherlock Holmes and says something like, "Don't be ridiculous, Watson. This is the case." And it was such a lovely surprise for the audience. They did it very, very well. So when we're watching it, we can appreciate the surprise. And when we're reading about it and thinking it through, we can appreciate being smarter than Watson at that particular point.
There couldn't be anything further from Sherlock Holmes than the police procedural.
Yes.
There's nothing intellectual about it. It's the detective is obsessed. He's obsessed with finding who did the crime. And his helper is frequently an interesting. Most important is interesting characters along the way, and the setting. Since mine are always set in New York City, well, I have been till now. The important thing is to show the city, show the world where people who aren't able to travel there can see it. and especially to meet people, characters who are in it. And either they help the detective or they hinder him. But he must be obsessed and not especially intellectual, just handy at what he does, which is interrogation and just clever in general.
I hate to throw cold water on this conversation, but I find those detectives who are the smartest guys in the room to be tiresome, to tell you the truth. You know, it's like, why are we always looking at this guy to explain the story to us? And I like my detectives that I read about not to be the smartest guys in the room, but to be persistent and perceptive and to be in it for the long haul and not just sit there and think about it, or, you know, look at somebody walking down the street and say, oh, he came from Wales the other day, 2 days ago. You know, you go, what, you know, what does that do for us? You know, as a reader, yeah, okay, maybe you know, it's like a parlor trick. But I like my detectives to be, you know, somebody who maybe has a limp, or he talks with a lisp, and he's not, and he's not an IQ guy. Okay, so I find those guys to be, and they realize it. They realize they're not the smartest guys in the room, so they just work harder at it. And the guy I'm thinking of right now is Lionel Esrod from Motherless Brooklyn by Jonathan Lethem.
I love that book.
And this is where I got the idea that my detective shouldn't be the smartest guy in the room. I heard Jonathan Lethem on a YouTube video one time, and he said, "Now I'm done with those smart guys. I want somebody who has to work hard, because that's what most of us have to do."
Absolutely true. And I think, and I see that there was a hand. Roberta, you had a hand.
Yeah. I was going to say that we're all talking now about the pros, the people whose job it is to do this. But a lot of us are writing cozies where somebody sort of literally stumbles on a dead body or is drawn into something that they don't really usually have to deal with, whether it's set in a suburb or in a New York neighborhood or an English village. It's just not something that somebody wants to do or is even supposed to do. But for some reason, they feel they have to get involved. And these are the, to me, interesting characters, because they're not only not the smartest person in the room, they aren't even supposed to be doing it, and yet they do. And a lot of the time they are completely dissuaded from it. The people who are supposed to be doing it, the local cops or whoever, tell them don't do it. But because they feel it is important to them and to whoever else is involved, they do it and they persevere. And those are the really interesting books. This is why cozies sort of proliferate, because people are interested, and the idea is, well, suppose I stumbled upon that dead body. What would I do? Would I just leave it to the cops, or would I do something about it?
Okay.
And I mean, my characters, I have one character who sort of falls into this because he literally steps on a dead body. And I have one who is a professional, but I put them in different settings so that it gives it a twist. And this is why I also like the historicals, like the Falco novels, which are set in ancient Rome, because you're drawn into something. Oh God, Dana Andrews' novels about what's her name, the blacksmith. She has this huge family and she keeps getting drawn into these things, and she doesn't want to be, but she is. So this is why we're fascinated by that kind of sleuth.
Well, I think that raises the question of the characteristics of a sleuth, because I'm going to toss something out here, because I think somebody once wrote, that I recall, that television is about family. It's about building family. In a workplace, in a family, in a firehouse or a bar or what have you, that it's all about having familiar characters that you go back and visit with periodically. I suspect that if we're doing a series, and we're not talking about the standalone where you have one sleuth who's doing something, but a series where you're going back to people, it's kind of the same way, and there are characteristics you like about those people, and then there are characteristics you won't tolerate. For example, I don't know if any of you has ever seen the CBS television adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express with Alfred Molina as Hercule Poirot around 1999, and it was contemporary, and Poirot had a laptop and he flirted with women. And I was sitting there watching it going, oh my God, Agatha Christie is dying a second and a third, maybe a fourth time, because she put a lot of work into creating, even though I've read that she started disliking him toward the end, she put a lot of time into creating him and making him special. And those were not characteristics that you could nod and smile about. Whatever you think of any of the actors playing Poirot, when they do something that is Poirot-like, and I think the recent Murder on the Orient Express, where Kenneth Branagh was looking at the eggs, trying to make sure they were exactly the same size, I'm thinking, okay, he may not look like David Suchet, but that's a Poirot move. So what do we think about characteristics of sleuth? And the one who is too smart and is too insufferable, that's one thing. The one who is smart, but people don't expect him or her to be smart, is another. But I think you're right. Most of us have to work hard in life, and most sleuths do too. And I have gotten some flack from the woman I love, who says, for a guy who writes detective stories, you're not very observant. And my favorite example is, we went to a birthday party. It was in like a rented space. We walk in, we're talking to people and so forth. And I said, how old is the birthday girl? And Tammy tapped me on the shoulder and pointed toward the wall that said, happy 50th birthday. I missed that. What I didn't miss was lots of really obscure details, like somebody missing part of an earlobe, or somebody who had a limp that suggested their height. There was a little difference in leg length between one leg and the other. Just little quirky things like that. And I've used that 50th birthday thing in my own writing to explain my detective's deficiencies, but he notices weird things and then can put them together later, because he will remember that particular thing. So that becomes something. So what characteristics do we truly appreciate with the sleuths we go back to?
Persistence.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
They will
Perception.
not give up no matter what.
Yeah.
And very often it can be physical. Some of the tough detectives get beaten up a lot. Or
Yes.
it can just be somebody trying to stymie them, deliberately obfuscating.
Yes. Well, persistence is certainly there. And I used to use Calvin Coolidge's quote with my students all the time. And persistence is the only thing that matters. And that's true. You see that. I mean, how many times have we seen the hero in something who's persistent and the villain says something like, why won't you just die? Because the person doesn't give up. And so I think that is absolutely true. Of course, there could be an art to reluctance as well. The person,
Anti-political,
I didn't quite hear that.
anti-political, meaning that he's going to keep going despite the fact that whoever he works for doesn't want him to.
Right.
And, they're looking for an easy way out, usually the politician, the city, the police department. But he can't stop himself. He believes I speak for the dead, although that's the biggest cliche I think you can find in detective literature. Although there's some truth to it.
I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of truth to that because, I mean, I know many of us in this organization have other preparations, but I do recall, I think, seeing that some people were academics and had like taught history or something like that. And history certainly gives us that sense that we're speaking for other people who can no longer speak for themselves. And I think that persistence, persistence is wonderful under those circumstances. What other characteristics? Okay, Susan, I see your hand.
Yeah, I think one of the two things that comes to mind is a sense of justice, not, I mean, whatever their right or wrong is, that by given a crime like murder, the scales of justice are out of balance, and that their job is to find out at least what happened and know who the culprit is, whether they're brought to justice, whether they're not. I mean, that's an individual thing, but it's a strong sense of feeling they owe something to society. It's part of their nature. The other thing I would say is curiosity. I just curious about everything. And that's another part of it, that they're whether it's a I think some people, like in Sue Grafton's novels, Kinsey is often given a case to work on. So you could say, well, it's a job, but then her curiosity and her what really happened, and that's what the readers want to know too, and they want to play along. And as far as smart people go, let me just go back to someone was talking about IQ and all that. There's a whole convention of having smart people like Nero Wolfe, like Dr. Gideon Fell. And I think those books are most effective when you have someone like Holmes or Dr. Fell, or the other one. What did I just say?
Archie
Yeah.
Goodwin.
Archie Goodwin.
Yeah,
Doing the footwork, doing the legwork for him, because he doesn't ever, he or rarely leaves his house in the city. So I think that it could get tedious, and I agree, having someone who's so smart. I mean, the way John Dixon Carr avoids tedium is having those wonderful locked room mysteries. So it's the reader, if he doesn't become involved with Dr. Fell, who gurgles a lot and has a guitar, which I guess is some throat disgustingness. He or she gets involved in, how did this happen? How did this thing happen? And it's what draws you to Wordle every day.
Mhm.
I'll go along with curiosity, and I also like enthusiasm. Excuse me. One of my favorite duos is actually from television, Castle. Anybody see that show, Castle? It was
Yes.
about 10 years ago.
Castle
I
and Beckett.
love that show because he was like a big kid and he was just so enthusiastic and curious. And then, of course, he's paired with a serious female detective, Beckett, who initially, as always happens, right? They butt heads and she hates him and tries to get him thrown off, but eventually they come to work together. But the other thing that was fun about that was he was a writer, mystery writer. That's why he was tagging around. And so he knew all this stuff, not because he was a brainiac, but because they'd say, well, how do you know so much about, 16th century Chinese pottery? And he's like, oh, well, I was writing this mystery a few years ago and I had to research this, that, and the other thing, and it made a lot of sense. But I thought it was neat the way neither one of them had all the answers. They played off each other, and that was interesting. And as far as the detectives that know everything, I mean, we might sometimes feel like we want to kill them, but their authors definitely did. They got so tired of them because Arthur Conan Doyle killed Sherlock Holmes, but then was forced by the outcry to bring him back. And I've read places where Agatha Christie was talking about how badly she wanted to kill Poirot, but she just wouldn't do it, partly maybe because she saw what happened when Conan Doyle had done that. So yeah, I like enthusiasm and again, where you get to play along with them a little bit. Because with Sherlock, it's always sort of like, well, he knows, but he's just bringing us along for the ride and not telling us. Where with a detective who really actually has to figure it out a little bit, you become enlightened as they do.
Well, that goes also to the idea of building family, because I remember in that show, eventually, the characters get married and live happily ever after, despite not getting along on screen, and the off screen rather. But they managed to build family through that. But
his daughter and mother were major characters.
Yes.
And then the other two, Ryan and Esposito, the other two detectives, they made sort of like an ensemble.
That's right. Absolutely right. Roberta.
I think somebody just sort of slid through it, but moral code, I think, is important.
Yes.
The detective, the sleuth, usually has a sense of right and wrong. There are things they will do, things they will not tolerate. And this is all sleuths, clear across the board: cozies, police procedurals, private eyes, spies, whatever. Sometimes the moral code gets blurred, but it's there. Sam Spade said it. There's things you do and things you don't do, and maybe this, maybe that, but my partner got killed, and that's why I'm going to turn you in.
Right. The film put it, when your partner gets killed, you got to do something. And I don't believe that line's in the novel, but it is in the film.
Yeah,
when
it is.
You're supposed to do something.
Yeah, it's there.
It's there. Okay. But you're right. A moral code is necessary, because the sleuth, I think, sees the gray areas that we tend not to see. We tend, as a species, and this is going to sound awful, to be simplistic thinkers. We want quick solutions to problems, and we come up with the dumbest stuff along the way. And not to pick on Herschel Walker, but when he was running for the Senate, he said, I don't believe in evolution. They said we came from monkeys, but monkeys are still here, right? And I heard that. I thought, what the hell is he talking about? He's thinking, well, if we came from monkeys, we're here, there should be no monkeys. I'm thinking, no, you don't know anything about evolution or logical reasoning, if that's the case. And the so there is a gray area that our sleuths wander in, where you're ready to they can make concessions. They make value judgments about whether some people can be turned in. Now, one of my favorite books is Murder on the Orient Express, and I've seen every film version of it. And I've liked them all except the Alfred Molina version. But the David Suchet version from the BBC, in that version, Poirot has genuine anguish about letting the train passengers go. There is a discussion in there that is not in the book, it's not in any of the other versions, where Poirot is actually agonizing over making the decision. And you can see the thought process that's there. And I was really impressed by that, because that's the sleuth is in the gray area and will frequently have to make judgments about things like that. So a moral code is necessary, and a certain degree of moral relativism. Well, this is a terrible thing, but the other outcome would be worse. So we'll go with the terrible thing.
The least terrible thing, yes.
And what I was going to mention earlier, one other thing about Sherlock Holmes, we don't like the smarty pants, but in the Guy Ritchie film Sherlock Holmes with Robert Downey as Sherlock Holmes, there's a wonderful scene where Holmes is sitting in a restaurant and he hears everything. He observes everything. And in that moment, when you see all this happening, you realize this has to be a burden, because you can't have, I mean, you just can't take in all this information and remain perfectly balanced and sane, because this is crazy. And that, I don't know if it was inspired by the scene in the film Superman Returns, but in that film, Superman flies out in space and listens to the world. And the cacophony is deafening. And you realize somebody who knows everything, sees everything, understands everything, takes in all this information. Most of us can't do it. In fact, in the Superman comic books recently, a Superman clone was trying to defeat Superman, but all the noise and everything he heard, everything he saw and perceived at once, he had not learned how to filter, and that enabled Superman to beat him. So, so I think there's a flip side to knowing everything, because it's a burden.
Unlike Sherlock Holmes, the modern detective story needs sex. The detective has to be a sexy devil. If he's located in big cities like Philadelphia, LA, New York City, he has a girlfriend, maybe a femme fatale, more likely a partner that he relies on to the death.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's again, we're building family, we're building people, and detectives are human like anyone else, and they need, even part of me would like to joke that Poirot could have benefited from having a relationship with someone. I don't know if that's true, but most other people do. And the relationships that detectives have may be fleeting or they may be permanent. And when I started my series, I was thinking, I was on a library panel at our central library in downtown Buffalo over the weekend for an author's day. And I was talking about creating my character, Gideon Rhymes. And I said, all these great cities have great private eyes. And I started naming cities and private eyes. I said, I came up with this in the mid teen to 20 teens, because I thought Buffalo deserved a private eye. And so I decided that he'd be a one woman man. I like being a one-woman man. I thought, well, let's let him like that too. And my son, who's kind of his inspiration, also likes being a one-woman man, partly because I said, Rebecca's the best thing that ever happened to you. You mess this up, I will kick your ass. Of course, this is a combat veteran and an ex-cop, a retired cop who could probably pluck me over without anything. But I think the human detective is important. The human sleuth is important because we want to identify with them. We don't want to identify with somebody who is absolutely reprehensible. I mean, certain types of people give us the creeps. The Hannibal Lecters and Tom Ripley's give us the creeps. They're fun to read about.
It needs recognizable defects.
Yes.
And we can all identify.
Yes, and they're deliciously evil. We can look at them and say, "Ooh, at least I'm not that bad." But we want some people we can identify with for that.
Like to, can I make a comment? I'm sorry. I'm not
Yes.
sure if I'm.
Go right ahead. I know I'm looking a little strange because the pictures are jumping around.
Yeah.
Okay, Linda.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of family and the cozies, and I write cozies, but in terms of the family, sometimes that brings me almost to like a Hallmarkian. And personally, who I love Reacher. I love Lee Child. Military police, not necessarily a detective, but he's a loner. He figures it out. He's justice is served. I like that. And people die and stuff all the time, and justice isn't always served when you talk about death and disease and that kind of stuff. So I don't want to come home and watch a Romeo and Juliet, somebody kick somebody's ass, because at least in my fictional world it happens. And he is not family. He's a loner. He's he moves on city to city and people to people, as you well know. But
Sexy as hell, Reacher.
yeah, I'm kind of like the opposite, somebody I mentioned before. I mean, as soon as people like that get married, it's a kid like another couple of months, and then usually, oh, I keep doing it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
You've been sort of bopping in and out.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. It must be where I am. But I was saying, to me, and to me, every time somebody like that gets married, it's like the kiss of dawn, like 2 months later. Once people get married and they settle down, the only one where that was funny was when Schwarzenegger and were in, when she became the spy with him.
Yeah, True Lies, Jamie Lee Curtis.
True Lies, right. So that one was
Jamie
cute.
Lee Curtis, yes.
They did that. But generally speaking, to me, once they get married and everybody's solving it, unless it's a Hallmark type of thing, I don't know.
Well, there's always Peter Wimsey and Harriet Vane. They got married and solved cases together. And then there's Nick and Nora Charles. So you do have
Spencer
those kind of relationships. Yes. But I agree that very often your sleuth will have a group around them. But whether, once again, in a lot of cozies, the person who is doing the sleuthing is a widow or a divorcee, and the standard cliche is that it is somebody who has been through a really awful experience and is now retrenching and going somewhere else and starting new, and stumbles upon a dead body, and here we go.
Well, and that's common, or somebody inherits, right, the inn from their restore it and they find dead bodies. But the only other thing I'm going to suggest to you is, I think that there is a big generational difference in this. So when you look at, for instance, my grandbabies are called the alpha generation, right? And I have a kid that's a millennial who's now in their 30s, 40s versus our Gen Ys and all that stuff. And I think there's a big generational difference in terms of what our audience, what they like. to be honest. I don't know if anybody has noticed that, but I think your younger readers don't look as much for that type of relationship because they're not as used to sci as, you know, we traditionally grew up with those kinds of marriages and one person relationships. So I think it also depends upon who your audience is as readers.
Okay.
I teach a course in sociology, and they're all millennials. And there's a tremendous difference between the millennial generation. But the millennial generations are not necessarily readers at this point in time.
Or they read different things. You know, they're reading graphic novels. They read different than picking up cozy things that we traditionally would pick up and read, you know? So I think that's a big thing. So the question is, you know, the audience you're writing to, at what point does your audience peter down? How often, I don't know, I think about sometimes when I'm writing and what things I include, detective or whatever else is going on. So
Well, I've been at 2 meetings lately where people in my audience, in one case, he was a professional detective, and he wanted to know what my credentials were for writing mystery novels with police. But how I've kind of protected that in the mystery series I have, my amateur detective, by the second book, connects with a woman on the police force, and he begins a relationship with her, which continues for several books. And eventually they have a partnership as detectives. So that's how I try to get around it a little bit.
yeah, and most cozies do the same thing. The amateur sleuth is always paired up with a detective, the town cop, somebody, you know, that keeps telling them leave it to us, and you know, there's always that becomes a love interest as well. So but I don't know, I see that in readers and comments and writing, so that's the only other thing that I was going to mention.
Policemen love nothing better than talking to authors. Once you get a rapport with them, you can't shut them up.
I think there's a level of truth to that. When my son was in his police department in Florida, you know, he'd done 3 combat tours in Iraq, and he became a cop when he and his wife both got out of the Army. And so he had said, I would like to, he said to one of his sergeants, my dad's coming to visit, and I wonder if I could arrange a ride along for him. And his sergeant said, well, there's paperwork to be done for that. It's complicated, blah, blah, blah. He said, I don't know. He said, well, here's my dad's card. Here's his website and some other stuff. Contact him and let him know what he needs to do. I never got a call, but when I got down there, he said, you know what? He looked you up. He saw the stuff you'd written. He saw your Edgar Award. And he said, I'll take him on a ride along myself. So there was no paperwork. And that sergeant became his closest friend on the force. And eventually that sergeant moved up to head their homicide squad. And, you know, we talked a lot and we communicated because I would have questions about procedures and so forth. But the reason I don't write procedurals is that I'm not a cop. I don't want to get those, get them wrong. I can write about a lone wolf who ignores the rules because that's closer to who I am. I pick which rules I'm going to ignore and which ones I'll justify. And that's kind of what my guy does. But you're right. Cops will talk. I have friends on the Buffalo Police Department, and then my son David's friend John, who's still with their department in Florida, and they will talk. They're happy, and they're happy to get an acknowledgement. When you put an acknowledgement in a book, they're like, "Ooh, look at what I did."
That's because nobody in their departments listens to them.
If nothing else, they will correct all your mistakes.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
Of course, I write books set in, as I like to say, strange times and places. So I can get out from under that. If I'm setting it in an alternate Manhattan or on a planet somewhere out in the galaxy, I can just make it up.
Oh, yeah. That's one of the joys of writing, is to make stuff up. But then the research part of it for your sleuth is fun too. And I realized I have a play opening this weekend here in Buffalo. And we're getting toward the end. So let's start talking about that, seeing your sleuth in 3 dimensions for real. And I have the play is called Split Wit. The witness to a murder suffers from agenesis of the corpus callosum. It never quite formed. They used to sever the corpus callosum to treat epilepsy. And what happens is when the 2 halves of your brain can't communicate, signals get lost. So he cannot explain what he saw. And my detective has to figure it out. And when I conceived of that play, I thought, Maxine. And Maxine Travis was a detective I created back around 2009, 2010 for a play, Scavenger's Daughter, a mystery that dealt with my approach to my father's Alzheimer's. And she was really good in the interrogation room. Then I saw a stage reading of the play in New York. I saw 2 productions in Rochester, 1 in Buffalo. And then an Indian film company bought the rights and made a film version in Mumbai, set in America with an immigrant family as opposed to an African-American family, which was my original play. And so I got to see 5 iterations of Maxine Travis. And when I wrote this latest play, I thought, this is a Maxine Travis play. I'll put her in there and so forth. Let her be the detective in this mystery. And the actress who's playing the part is really delighted that there have been so many other iterations. I gave them all DVDs of the film to look at. And the director of the play, who's been an actor in several of my plays, knows my work. And he knew when I moved Maxine from the Syracuse police department, where she was for the first play, had her transfer to Buffalo and join my Nickel City universe. And he said, I think we should call this a Maxine Travis mystery. And I thought, that's an idea, because she specializes in the interrogation room, and maybe that's what we'll do. So I've got to see her on the big screen. I've gotten to see a few different versions of her on stage. And just last night, I was watching the latest iteration at rehearsal. And tonight, I'm doing this, or otherwise I would see them in costume for this time, which would be thrilling. So who would you like to see playing your sleuth or sleuths? And I would say the answer to that is, say who your sleuth is, and give a few characteristics, and then say what actor you might enjoy seeing do that.
I always cast. I don't find myself very visual, so I always try and cast actors and actresses in my head, even as I start to write, because it helps me visualize them. Okay, if this were put on the screen, this is who would play this person, and it really helps me visualize them.
Yes. So any particular people that you can, and I'll
yeah, my latest one is about an architect, and would have been perfect for, he's a little older than she is now, but Olivia Colman, the actress I very much like. She's been in a lot of different things, and I think she'd be perfect for my 30-year-old intellectual architect.
Okay.
So when I write, I keep Olivia's picture in my mind.
Okay.
My protagonist is named B.J. Gleason, and I'd like to see a slightly younger Harrison Ford play him.
Okay.
And mine is an architect also, Richard, as you know. And I think the perfect actor for him would be Donald Sutherland, and the perfect actor for the woman he's in love with would be Penelope Cruz. But this movie would have had to have been made 25 years ago.
Okay. Anyone else? Al?
Yeah, my, oh,
Go ahead.
mine
go ahead.
is, go. Mine is Corey Geller. She's mid to late 30s, ex former FBI, retired, and lives on Long Island now. And I would actually like to see Rosie Perez because ethnically, no, physically, no, but she has both the smarts and the spirit that my character has. And every time I see her, I just sort of, she is Corey. And so on the other hand, Susan Sarandon played in the film of my first novel, Compromising Positions. And she was wonderful and intelligent and nothing like what I imagined. And there you go. But whatever pain you have, you're adequately compensated.
Yeah, somebody said when they buy the rights to your book, cash the check and walk away.
Exactly. Yeah.
Al?
Well, as some of you know, I write very dark, hard-boiled stuff about a sex worker, a prostitute, to be blunt, named Diana Andrews. And I would need someone who's beautiful in an offbeat way and could also deliver a punch. And that would be Hilary Swank.
Okay. Okay.
Nice. Detective Harry Corbin. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'll go next. Go ahead.
NYPD Detective Harry Corbin. Myself, 30 years ago, if I could only be 6 foot 3 inches tall. Not Tom Cruise, please.
Yeah.
When I first, oh, go ahead, Linda.
My main cozy for my Misty series, Megan Stanford comes back to Jersey Shore, and she's a journalist in each book and stuff. But I always would see somebody like Ashley Williams being the perfect person because she's not quite hard boiled, but intuitive enough and smart enough to get it done, work around. So I see someone like Ashley Williams playing that. That's who I'd like to say.
Okay.
When I first conceived of Halvar the hireling, believe it or not, I was thinking of Arnold Schwarzenegger in his Conan phase. And as a matter of fact, when I was asked to describe him for the cover artist, I said a cross between Arnold Schwarzenegger and Hulk Hogan. But you know, a big thick guy with a big walrus mustache, and not too bright. But that was Halvar, an ex-mercenary who literally stumbles into things.
Okay. I for my character Gideon Rhymes, who's in my series, my Nickel City series, he was inspired by my son, who did 3 tours in Iraq and became a cop, and then left being a police officer after injury. His leaving was a different matter altogether. So I think of my son, but my son's not an actor. And so I thought of Michael B. Jordan, maybe, but I think the one I most prefer is Nyambi Nyambi. If you know him, he played the short order cook on Mike and Molly. But where I saw him most and thought, hey, he could do rhymes, was on the Paramount series, The Good Fight. He played the investigator for the law firm on that, and he was really good. And I thought, yeah, I think he's the guy I would like to see as Gideon Rhymes. Anyone else? Let me look at the next page and see if anybody's waiting over there. Okay, well, this has been fun, folks. We'll have another one, let's see. Well, we won't have another until I think February, because next month is Rebels. And then in January, I think we take a break. Is that right, Al?
I believe so. You can. There's no reason why you can't. I think we probably do skip programming in January.
Yeah. And so February we'll pick up. I think we'll pick up with a CrimeCraft and then shift into Spotlight. And continue that. Any final thoughts or anything to add before we log off?
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
No, thank you all.
Thank you.
It has been fun. I always learn so much when I'm in a group like this. Well,
All right.
take care, folks. Everyone have a good night. I'm going to end the meeting at this point. Take care.
Bye-bye.
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 Sorry, I got here late.
No problem.